Minnesota Twins add a handful of low-level relief pitchers to the bullpen, but I have a high-leverage reliever the Twins need to consider trading for.
You are Locked On Twins, your daily Minnesota Twins podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Twins. I'm CJ Baumgartner, new host of the show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. It's the last call for football on FanDuel. If you're a new customer, bet just $5 and get $200 in bonus bets if you win. Today, we're taking a look at a handful of arms that the Twins are kind of stockpiling in the bullpen. Why they're not really needle movers, but we'll take into some interesting options within those very low wattage moves, plus the #3 option of the Twins offseason. Where does it rank on the list? How big? What are we looking at? And why it has implications for the team, not just in 2026, but down the road as well. But first, if we're talking, and we've been talking bullpen, it feels like a lot in the short time that we've been talking here together, but it's been important. It's been the Twins' most glaring need all throughout the offseason. And while the Twins have addressed other issues like getting some lineup help with Josh Bell and others, adding a backup catcher or two, they've really neglected finding high leverage, big time relievers to add to the bullpen. There's been little additions here and there and, things around the margins that every team does. You bring in, relievers on a minor league deal, hoping for a bounce back option. You bring in, waiver claims and things like that. So it's not uncommon what the Twins have been doing. The problem is if you look at it like you did last year, where you had Duran and Jax and Theo and Varland, and Brock Stewart and some of these other guys, well, then those lower wattage bullpen moves are like, oh, okay, filling out depth, taking some flyers. That's what you should do. But in the absence of a high leverage arm, it really feels like, what are we doing here? And the Twins haven't gotten one yet. They didn't get one in the free agent market. And sometimes that's okay. Sometimes, because relievers are something that teams can overpay for a position that pitches every other day for an inning at best. So it's, like running backs in football, there's a certain value there, and you don't want to be spending a ton of your team's capital on reliever options, and you want to develop them internally. And that's all great, but the Twins are in a desperate position because they sold off all the high leverage arms in their bullpen. They need to start from scratch. They don't have any proven guys in house. And if they're not going to go get any on the free agent market, that's fine. They might need to consider trading for one. And here's a name where I know we only have 10 days until pitchers and catchers report, which is crazy, but hey, don't count the Twins out and making last-minute moves. We talked about Jeremy Zoll, the new Twins GM. How similar is he to Falvey? How different will he be? We talked about that on yesterday's show, so go and listen to that. But I think the Twins should make a move to trade for Anthony Bender of the Miami Marlins. And I'm going to break down my case for why I think that should happen. So, it'd be the most impactful splash that the Twins could make. Yesterday, we talked about splash moves in free agency, and now today we're talking about the biggest splash move they could make on the trade market, realistically speaking. So Anthony Bender's, came up in the league in 2021 and, has had a few different seasons here, all with the Miami Marlins. Last year, he only pitched in 50 innings for the Fish because of a stress reaction in his right tibia. You'd think he'd be ready for the opening day by then. I'd assume he'd be ready for opening day by then. He just had his arbitration hearing last month. I believe him and the Marlins settled. He's making around $2.8 million, has one more year left of team control. So not only could you get him for this season, you also could have him for the 2027 season. And then by that time, hopefully you've developed, again, some internal arms to take over those top spots in the bullpen. Really, for Bender, he had a really good year. 2.16 ERA, a 3.62 FIP. So even if he was pitching over his head that well, still a 3.62 ERA is nothing to scoff at if, again, FIP is fielding independent pitching ranked on an ERA scale. Despite striking the career low, 20.6% of hitters. So, you want typically your high leverage relievers to be able to get strikeouts because Usually they're coming in big jams, bases loaded, runners on second and third, nobody out, and you want them to get swings and misses to prevent the other team from putting a ball in play and at least getting one of the runs home and things like that. But that being said, great ERA, and even though he had a career low strikeout rate, he kept the ball on the ground. And he got swinging strikes on just 8% of his offerings, which was a personal low. But again, just had a career best ground ball rate and was one of the most trusted options. He had a .213 batting average on balls in play. And he wasn't the closer for the Marlins, but he was one of the primary setup men. He was used in a lot of trusted situations. He had a positive win probability added despite being in those situations. He had a high leverage index, which we've talked about on the show before. It's a stat from Fangraphs that basically says how many times are you being put in big spots. If you're somebody with a low high leverage index, basically what that means is you're mop-up duty. You're not coming in when the games are important. If you have a high one, it means that you are coming in big situations where managers need you to get outs and need you to kind of keep the other team at bay. The thing about Bender is, in those situations, he comes in big spots, he gets the ball on the ground, and here's where I think, even though he did not have a good job missing bats last year, I do think his 96.6 average fastball velocity is pretty good. You can sling it 96.6 miles an hour. That's one of the top in baseball, one of the top percentiles. If you look at Baseball Savant, a 28.9 strikeout rate on his sweeper, which has been his best pitch, plus 11 if you look at Baseball Savant. And even if he's not your traditional closer, he can still be a primary setup man, which is highly needed for the Twins. Maybe the Twins would trade for him and elevate him to closer and give him that opportunity. Maybe the Twins would say, you know what, we're developing the closer by house. We're going closer by committee, whatever you want to say. The Twins are in desperate need of high leverage firefighter type relief arms who you trust, who Derek Shelton can trust, going into a late game situation when the Twins need to have it. And for all the talk of the Twins' great pitching rotation, and they have one, and they can be the best in baseball, but if they don't have a bullpen that can hang on to a lead, you are going to basically decapitate any value that your starting pitching can give you, because if it's 2-1 and Pablo Lopez pitches 7 innings of 1-run ball and your reliever comes in and immediately gives up runs, you still lost. So that's going to be the biggest thing. You need to complement this starting rotation by getting them competent bullpen arms at the top of your relief core. Right now, the Twins don't have that. There are some internal options they could go with, but again, you're having to trust that they develop. And if you take a starter, put them into the bullpen, it takes a little bit of work to get them used to coming in as a reliever, to getting used to the routine, to getting all this stuff down. And again, there's just no guarantee that they're going to come in and be magical. The Twins are probably going to make that bet, and I would advise against it. I would say if you could at least get one arm in there that you can trust in high leverage situations. And the Miami Marlins, are they in a competitive window? Are they rebuilding? The answer is they always feel like they're in both. They've traded some big name pitchers. Now, they traded Cabrera, their big starting pitcher, this offseason to the Yankees. It's not that the Miami Marlins are never for sale. You can always find a trade. The Twins have had success with this, taking Pablo Lopez from Miami, who is a nice star pitcher, and they turned him into a top-line ace of a staff who you can trust in a playoff game. And this is where, again, I think the Twins would be really intrigued at the fastball having as much life as it does, paired with the sweeper, which are pretty much kind of the pitches he throws. It's more of a sinker fastball. It's a sinker baller, which again is what, the old Kyle Gibson sinker baller is what leads to that ground ball action. And if they can find a way to also get the sweeper to continually miss bats, and you have that paired up, it's a really intriguing combination. And obviously it takes 2 to tango. The Twins would need to get the Marlins on board. You'd have to give up somebody involved. And it's more than just throwing in an Austin Martin or a Trevor Larnach or something like that. I don't quite know what that official price tag is going to be. I'm horrible when it comes to assuming value for trades before they happen. But what I would say is, the Twins have a really deep farm system. The Twins have some options with hitters coming up where you could maybe send one over and take a chance and give yourself a 2-year high leverage bullpen arm. And again, we talk about not wanting to overspend in free agency, and that's true. He's making 2.8 million, 2.3 million, somewhere in that range. And yeah, he'll get a pay bump next year in arbitration, but realistically, he's not going to jump up to a $10 million figure or something like that. And the Twins really could get a cheap reliever that they could throw into this bullpen, trust in high leverage situations, and move on. Even if he's not the traditional closer, he could be a primary setup man. He could be a part of a closer by committee. It doesn't matter. He had a win probability added that was +1. He had a +1.5 average leverage index. So I really do like this idea. I think that the Twins could piggyback off this. I think that they could use a way to get life on the fastball, find a way to continuously use the sweeper. Pablo Lopez was a good pitcher, generated strikeouts as a starter. He went from that to throwing 200 strikeouts his first season with the Twins. And I think that there's a similar path there if they could find a way to get the stars to align and get a trade. I think Anthony Bender would be a really solid pickup for the Twins. You know, you can always trade with the Miami Marlins if you get a right deal. And then now the next 2 years, it's not that your bullpen is done, but at the very least, again, you raise the floor of the bullpen unit. It's in desperate need of a ceiling. It really needs somebody. It's like, who gets you really excited when it's like, so-and-so's coming out of the pen. You know, if you're the other team, you're the other fan base, you're watching a Twins game, it was Jax is coming out of the pen, Duran's coming out of the pen, game over, we're done. And the Twins just don't have that right now. And look, I'm a fan of, converting some of those guys to the bullpen, whether it's your Marco Reyes, your Connor Prelips, and moving them to be that high octane, high leverage reliever, a la Joan Duran, a la Griffin Jax. But it's not going to happen overnight. If you remember with Jax and Duran, it was a slow build for them to become as good as they were. That doesn't mean that they didn't throw them in there, and it doesn't mean that the Twins used them, but it's to say that it's not that Joan Duran came onto the scene and within April of 2022 was one of the league's best closers. He had to kind of get used to the routine, figure out within himself how he could maximize his abilities. So it's not going to be an overnight thing. And if you give Bender in there to be one of those primary guys, to take the pressure off those young guys and allow them to work on things, it really would help out the team in the long haul. You'd get him for the next 2 years. And if for whatever reason your internal guys all develop and you all have it work out, well, now you have another season of Anthony Bender being a really good reliever. You can ship him away and get assets back and move on. But I really think that the Twins are not going to, there's no good reliever to sign that's going to be a high leverage guy. Nobody you sign is going to be better than Taylor Rogers. And I think Taylor Rogers is more suited for the Caleb Thielbar role. We talked about that on the show last week. Go back and watch it. But they need somebody who you can trust to go in the 7th inning in a jam, to clean up the 8th inning, to slam the door in the 9th. And this Twins team needs all the help they can get. They're projected 77 wins off of Fangraphs. And I think adding a guy like Anthony Bender, right-handed reliever, who can come in and just give you some stability, would help out this team in the long run. We're going to talk more about the bullpen because the Twins added a few waiver claims and minor league signings, and we'll just kind of break down each pitcher and which one has the best shot of sticking with the Minnesota Twins. We're going to talk about that right after this. It's the last call for football on FanDuel. One final Sunday, one last kickoff, the final chance to get in on the action before the NFL season officially comes to a close. This is Super Bowl 60, and FanDuel's making sure you're right in the middle of it with a special offer just in time for the biggest game of the year. Whether you're backing the favorite, riding with the underdog, or building one last same-game parlay, this is the game everyone's been waiting for. This is where predictions turn into parlays, stats turn into storylines, and every snap feels bigger. It's the perfect way to cap off the season and make the Super Bowl even more exciting from kickoff to the final whistle. If you're a new customer, bet just $5 and get $200 in bonus bets if you win. Make it count because after the Super Bowl, the season's over. Last call for football on FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of Super Bowl 60. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Want to thank you for making Locked On Twins your first listen of the day, and thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. If you haven't already, go check out our new Everydayer Club. It's access to an ad-free audio feed from Locked On Twins, compatible with Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and every other major podcast app. Go to lockedontwins.supercast.com or tap the link in the show notes to learn more. So the Minnesota Twins not getting a high leverage reliever quite yet, although again, Anthony Bender would be my pick to go out and get. But the Twins did make a flurry of moves over yesterday. It was fascinating to see them all come in. And it was like another one. This is like 3 in a 24-hour span. Who are these guys? Which one has the best chance of sticking? Let's take a look at Matt Bowman, who the Twins brought back into the organization on a minor league contract. This is if you look at the MLB transaction log. I don't think the Twins have officially announced it, but that just kind of means he's probably a non-roster invitee to camp. He had 2 stints in Minnesota in 2024, pitched 7 innings, 2.45 ERA, had a 6.2 ERA with Baltimore in 2025. Low strikeouts, doesn't really give up a ton of walks though. Always around the strike zone, generates ground balls and weak contact when he's working. And when things aren't working, he'll leave too many balls over the heart of the plate and get hit. Extension is in the 80th percentile in Baseball Savant, which, interestingly enough, is the exact same extension Joe Ryan gets on his pitches. Now, that doesn't mean that they're exactly the same pitcher, but what it does mean is that one of Joe Ryan's best abilities is to hold the ball in his hand and prevent a hitter from being able to see it as long as maybe another pitcher is. If you can hold that ball in your hand and discuss what the pitch is a split second earlier, it's a lot harder for a hitter to tell what pitch you're throwing and to be able to react to it and swing. And I think if you're Minnesota, you could look at that if you're the Twins and see, okay, like we could do some of this thing similar we do with Joe Ryan and try and see if that could give us some similar results in the long run. Also, just, again, as we've mentioned earlier in the show, the old Kyle Gibson sinker baller. It's his main pitch, sinker, and, the secondary pitch has been his sweeper, and I think the Twins have had success tweaking sweepers and working with guys with Pete Mackey, his pitching coach, and he's still on under new manager Derek Shelton. So I think if, you let him do the sinker baller, you keep trying to get those balls on the ground, and then you use the sweeper as the pitch to generate some swings and misses, I think there's something there. I definitely, I'm not going to say that he's, again, going to be this primary 7th inning setup man, but I think if you're just looking at another body to give the bullpen some options for the Twins, whether he starts the year with the club, whether he starts the year in St. Paul, you go through so many relievers over the course of a year. You could get 50 of them, and you'll find yourself still in July going, oh man, we're going to need to make a waiver claim sometime soon. So that's just the nature of the beast. Relievers are fluky. They get hurt. They are up. They are down. And when you look at that in the aggregate, you take a bunch of flyers on guys. So it's a fine bullpen move if you're just adding a body. Again, if you're relying on him to be your 8th inning setup man, you're going to be in a rough position. Looking at Jackson Kowar, which is the one the Twins did announce, they claimed him off waivers from the Seattle Mariners because the Mariners got Johnny Pareda from the Twins for cash considerations. And then to make room on the 40-man roster, had to get rid of Kowar, and the Twins scooped him up. So in a way, they traded Johnny Pareda for Jackson Kowar, if you want to look at it in that sense. Kowar is a 4-seamer and a slider with a changeup, but mainly 4-seamer and slider. 97.3 miles an hour on that fastball velo. You can see why the Twins took a chance on him. That dude throws gas. And you know what? They don't have a ton of arms in their bullpen that just straight up throw gas. So why not take a flyer on him? From that regard, he did have an ERA of 4.24 in 2025 and a FIP over 5, which, again, fielding independent pitching on an ERA scale, kind of trying to take luck and ballpark factors and other things like that, basically says he pitched worse than his stats show in 2025. He's a hard thrower, but weirdly, mess strikeout numbers. Throws the ball hard, but can't find a way to get swings and misses. And sometimes you look at that and you go, man, he's throwing the ball really hard. That must be tough to hit. And it is, but not as tough to hit as you think. Big league hitters all the time will tell you, I can hit speed movement is the hard part. So if you know a fastball is coming and it doesn't move and you know it's going to be around the zone, there's a good chance you're going to find something good to hit. And that's what made Jhoan Duran such a tough guy to face, because not only could he throw 97 miles an hour, 99 miles an hour, 101 miles an hour, but also that fastball had just a little bit of movement when he threw the ball. And it was really tough for hitters to try and barrel that thing up. And that's the thing with Kowar. Doesn't have a ton of movement on that fastball, despite throwing it really, really hard. And if you're the Twins, can you find a way to get some movement? Can you find a way to play up that sweeper to generate some swings and misses? The good news is for Kowar is he is around the strike zone. 9.9% career walk rate, which is his career best, albeit still worse than the league average, but still a 5% improvement from his career average. And even though it's worse than the league average, it's not miles worse. It's closer to the league average than it is from being kind of his career numbers, which is a good thing. If he can neutralize that enough, stay around the strike zone, and find a way to miss some bats, you can make some work there. He's been a ground ball pitcher, but his issue last year was teams were hitting the ball on him in the air, whether it was home runs, but also just teams getting deep fly balls, high line drives, things like that. If you're a ground ball pitcher and you don't have a good ground ball rate, things ain't working. So there's a reason why Seattle put him on waivers, but, one team's disregarded reliever is another team's treasure, I guess, in this sense. He improved on his, if the Twins can improve on his +2 fastball rating. Again, I really like Baseball Savant. You can check out a player's pitch repertoire, and it'll just give you a simple score of like, hey, this guy's fastball this year is +8. It's -7. It's whatever. And it just gives you a good vibe of what pitches have been working for a guy and what pitches haven't. And there's a little bit more of a deeper breakdown, but that's kind of the simple way of putting it. He had a +2 fastball, which is good, not great. So if the Twins can find a way to improve on that fastball, not necessarily in velocity, but finding ways to hide it, finding ways to get a little bit of movement, that would be the next step for him. His fastball got hit primarily up in the zone. And if you're going to continue doing that, if the Twins aren't going to make giant deep-seated changes in his approach, well, the Twins have been successful with Joe Ryan, with Bailey Ober, on working with starting pitchers that pitch up in the zone. And if you look at Ober and if you look at Ryan, it's not that they have a ton of velocity on their fastball, but again, movement to try and be able, and location to be able to pitch up in the zone while still finding a way to not get totally destroyed. They give up some home runs here and there, but that's the price of doing business. I think there's kind of a path to success, and you've seen the Twins use that. So again, I'm not saying this is going to happen, but I'm saying here's the vision. If you're the Twins, here's what the thought is when you get them in the building. It's a fine bullpen move if you're just adding another body to help fill out the roster. You still need high leverage, high talented arms. And I believe with this Kowar move, claiming him off waivers, that now fills up that 40-man roster spot that the Twins had from getting rid of Ed Julian. We talked about options to fill up that 40-man roster spot last week on the show. Go back and listen to that one where we kind of break it down in detail. But 40-man roster's full. You add him. He's likely going to make the big league club. I believe he's out of options. So if you have to get rid of him, he's going back out on waivers, which is likely why Seattle put him on waivers there. One last one is the Twins and right-handed reliever Eduardo Salazar are in agreement on a minor league contract. That's what John Heyman of the New York Post reported. He'll presumably be in camp, he says, as a non-roster invitee later this month. He had an ERA of 6, 5.99, but you get my point. In 70 big league innings, really good extension, as we've talked about before, and can generate weak ground balls when he's working. But again, below average strikeout and walk rates. It's not just that the strikeout rate is low. If you're generating weak ground balls, you're trying to pitch to contact, that's kind of your thing. It's the walk numbers. If you're trying to generate those weak ground balls, you're probably pitching low in the zone. And if you can't locate low in the zone and you're just throwing pitches in the dirt and you're walking guys and adding base runners, walks for pitchers are just the kiss of death, and especially for a reliever. If you're a reliever and you have a giant walk rate, you're done. You're just done. Because if you come in as a reliever and you have a clean inning, like you coming into this game and it's the 7th inning, nobody out, nobody on base, and you walk the first 2 guys, you're done. Like you've immediately put your team in a hole. And if you consistently do that, you're not going to stick. So if cleaning up the walks, if the guy is able to locate, if Salazar is able to locate his pitches, there's a chance it could work out. If he's not, congratulations, St. Paul Saints. You're going to be seeing a lot of that guy. Another depth signing, but again, that's not the Twins' most pressing issue. If you were to add all three of these relievers to the Twins' bullpen from a year ago, you go, oh, cool. Like, these are some nice low leverage flyers you're taking. And if they work out, awesome. You've added another arm to the mix. And if they don't work out, well, you just keep them in St. Paul or you release them and you move on. But the fact that we are all looking at these is like, you know, are we looking at Jackson Kowar as potentially coming in and being an important part of this team? Are we looking at, you know, Eduardo Salazar being the Twins' sixth inning guy to come in? We don't know, because there's just so many question marks at the back end of this bullpen, and that's the theme. And this is something where if the Twins just don't address it at all, and there's a chance that they move some starters to relievers at the beginning of the season, so we'll go through a whole spring training not really knowing either. The Twins want to compete, and I think that if a couple things break their way, starting pitching, the development of some young players, they are in a really good spot. But the thing that could absolutely sink them is a bad relief corps and nobody to hang on to games that your team is fighting to win. And it can be so demoralizing for a squad when you feel like your bullpen doesn't have you, and you feel like even though you have a 3-2 lead in the seventh inning, you know your team isn't winning that night. And it's important for this team to make sure they solve that and get themselves in a good position for this season. They don't need to load up the bullpen like they had it a year ago, but you need just one or two arms you can trust in this situation. And that's just the biggest thing for this team that will hold them up. There's other things. Starting pitchers could get injured. The lineup could continue not to develop with the young guys like Lewis and Lee and all that. And then you end up with a bottom 10 lineup like the Twins did last year. That's all possible, and the bullpen doesn't even matter, and this team stinks, and we move on. But that being said, there is a path to compete, and if this ownership, if this front office, if this team is serious about competing in 2026, they got to get serious about the bullpen. We're going to wrap things up in the show by talking about the number 3 moment of the Twins offseason and what it has to do not just for 2026, but possibly establishing the position down the road, and meaning one of the most prominent Minnesota Twins could be traded at some point this season. That's all coming up right after this. All right, so we're doing the number 3 moment of the Minnesota Twins offseason. Number 1, as we talked about on Monday's show, well, that was bringing in, or yesterday's show, that was bringing in the Polads, the new ownership group, Tom Polad coming in, and then Derek Falvey being let go or mutually agreed to part ways. Was it Derek Falvey? Was it Polad? I talk about that earlier in the week. Go back to Monday's show. But that was the number 1 moment. All of that aggregated in because of, do I even need to explain it? Looking at the we've broken down throughout the, we've kind of gone from 5 to 1, but then number 1 just took so much precedence. It's like, we might as well get that out of the way. You know, Josh Bell has been number 5, Taylor Rogers, number 4, and then number 1, obviously, Polad and Falvey. Looking at the number 3 moment of the Minnesota Twins offseason, it's Victor Caratini signing that 2-year, $14 million deal to be the Twins' primary backup catcher. And really what it does is it gets the Twins back to the status quo that they've pretty much always had under Derek Falvey. The first signings Derek Falvey made in 2016, like December 2016, his first offseason as head of the Twins front office, and they brought in Jason Castro from the Houston Astros to be their primary backup, or to be their starting catcher. And then by the end of it was the primary backup, but they had him in there, and you had him mixed with Garver in the first couple seasons. And then you move on from him. Garver and then Ryan Jeffers are all of a sudden in 2020 and 2021 your primary catching duo, kind of splitting responsibilities. And then you went from getting rid of Garver, and then it was Jeffers for a while. And then in 2023, they brought in Christian Vasquez, and Vasquez and Jeffers have been kind of that 1A, 1B tier. And I think the Twins did this best in 2016, where not only did you have Castro, not only did you have Garver, but you also had Astudillo working in there. You had just this deep lineup of catchers that you could play out there. And basically what it meant, it didn't mean so much that everybody deserved all this equal playing time, but what it did do was it kept everybody fresh. And it meant that if a catcher had a really good week, you just kind of keep riding the hot hand until they started to slump a little bit. And then the other guy by that time probably gets out of whatever funk he's in and you move on. It keeps everybody fresh. It keeps everybody accountable. And I think that just over the course of a season, it's so important for catchers. You know, it's the saying about catchers. They always take a dip in production in the second half of the season because they just wear down from catching all season long. And for the Twins, the way they've neutralized that is essentially having a 1A, 1B catching tandem. And it felt like at the beginning of the offseason when Christian Vasquez wasn't coming back, the Twins brought in Alex Jackson and a couple other minor, catching options to kind of fill out the backup room. It was like, okay, well, that's, Jeffers is the starting catcher and the Twins will move on. Maybe he's earned that opportunity. If you're going to cut payroll again, maybe you focus on other areas of the roster, give Jeffers his opportunity. But here's where things got interesting. Ryan Jeffers is only under team control for the rest of this season. He is not going to be with this team next year. And it really does feel like that. You wondered if Ryan Jeffers was going to get traded at the deadline, but Ryan Jeffers stayed on the team, probably just because they still need catchers at the end of the day. And that's a hard position to find. And the Twins are hanging on to Ryan Jeffers for the moment. But you have to think that if the Twins are not competitive at the trade deadline, that Ryan Jeffers, he's just got it. He'll just be gone. So he's going to be gone, I think, regardless, because I don't think the Twins are interested in giving Jeffers a huge extension because he's one of the top 10 hitting catchers in baseball and would be in pretty high demand if he were to hit the free agent market. Not that he would be like one of one, this guy's going to make $30 million, but certainly would get a 3-year deal, somewhere in the range of $15 to $18 million. And I just don't know if the Minnesota Twins really sign up for that. So they signed Victor Caratini for 2 years, $14 million, really good value to just give yourself a backup catcher. And, assuming Jeffers is a Twin all throughout 2026, Jeffers is your primary catcher. He's your 1A. And then Caratini is your 1B. And the Twins under Vasquez, even though Jeffers was running circles around Vasquez in terms of his hitting and in terms of his, offensive production, they still would give Vasquez a lot of starts because you want to keep those catchers fresh. But here's the thing of why the Caratini signing is, again, it's not the best roster allocation with your limited salary space. But if you're just judging the move in a vacuum for the catching room, it's really nice because it's only $7 million per year. You have him over 2 years, and the bar to replace Christian Vasquez offensively is very, very low. Vasquez had a 545 on base plus slugging last year, whereas Caratini had a 728. Better. Now, Vasquez is a more well-rounded catcher defensively, but Caratini's offensive production is so much better. Caratini is still a veteran catcher that can work with pitchers. So even if he doesn't do all the things defensively Vasquez does, if he can hit, if he can work with pitchers, he'll be a nice backup for this team and he'll get a ton of playing time with Ryan Jeffers. And Jeffers is, again, one of the top 10 hitting catchers in baseball. But one of the reasons he's been so impactful is because the Twins haven't asked him to do too much. If you look, his on-base plus slugging in the second half of his seasons is actually better than the OPS on the first half of seasons. Not by much, but slightly better. And if the trend of catchers is to be progressively worse as the year goes on, Jeffers has done a really good job in his career bucking that trend, partially because of Jeffers, also partially because of what the Twins have been able to do, managing the workload and putting him in a good position. And Caratini's multi-year deal gives the Twins a starting catcher in case Jeffers does get traded, whether before the season, whether he gets traded at the trade deadline. You have now your starting catcher in 2027, which is going to help bridge the gap to the flurry of catchers the Twins traded for at the deadline. It was really one of their weakest spots of the farm system was their ability to develop catchers, or at least kind of in the current iteration of the Twins farm system. Eduardo Tait was the big headliner of the Joan Duran trade. And for Duran now, in that trade, you got Tait, who really had a really nice Twin stint in Cedar Rapids in A-ball, but he's going to need to go through a couple more rings of the minor league system before we can seriously consider thinking about him. So you have this year and all of next year. And then by that time, you hope Taillon is ready and knocking on the door of the big leagues. He's the number 65 overall global prospect and number 3 prospect overall in the Twins system, according to MLB.com. So that's offseason move number 3 in terms of ranking the importance of them. We're going to wrap it up with number 2 tomorrow. We're also going to be talking about offseason grades for the Twins. Let me put it to you this way. They may need to go back to school. Thanks today for tuning in to Locked On Twins. And remember that make sure you subscribe and follow Locked On Twins so you get all the latest episodes. You can find me on X at BombCJ30. And if you never miss an episode, the Everydayer Club is built for you. Get Locked On Twins ad-free plus members-only Discord access and more. Head to lockedontwins.supercast.com to join the club. For those of you on video, we send you to the first ever 24/7 National Locked On Podcast Network YouTube channel on audio. Make sure your second listen, Locked On MLB. I'm CJ Baumgartner. See ya.